My name is Nicole, and at 35 years old, I am the owner of the Compass Rose, a small hotel perched on the cliffs of Gull's Landing, where the salt-laced wind tells stories of shipwrecks and second chances. It's a place of quiet elegance, a sanctuary I built with my own two hands from the wreckage of a life I thought was perfect. 5 years ago, the people I called my family, the in-laws who had once promised me a lifetime of love, orchestrated my public exile. They stood by their son, my husband, as he left me for a younger woman, and they made sure every door in our shared world was slammed shut in my face. Today, they are planning a lavish 50th anniversary party, a desperate attempt to paper over the cracks in their own gilded facade. They've booked the most exclusive venue on the coast, a place renowned for its beauty and impeccable service. They have no idea it's mine. In a few hours, they will walk through my doors, and they won't realize who holds the keys to their grand affair until I am the one standing behind the check-in desk to greet them. This isn't just a story about getting even. It's a story about what happens when you lose everything you thought you wanted, only to find everything you ever needed. Before I tell you how their ultimate betrayal became my greatest triumph, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Let me know in the comments below. And if you've ever had to rebuild your life from scratch, hit that like button so I know I'm not alone. If you're new here, make sure you subscribe to join our community of survivors and storytellers. For a decade, my life with Mark Masterson had been, to all outside observers, a fairy tale. And for a long time, I believed it too. His parents, Richard and Eleanor, had welcomed me into the family with an almost overwhelming warmth. Richard, a man whose portfolio was as meticulously managed as his crisp white shirts, was the patriarch, a figure of quiet authority who treated me with a fond, paternal indulgence. Eleanor was the family's heart, a woman who moved through life with the confident grace of someone who had never known a day of true hardship. She would clutch my hand at family dinners, her rings cool against my skin, and declare to anyone who would listen, "Nicole is the daughter I never had." I drank it in, this performance of affection, because I wanted so badly for it to be real. I had lost my own mother young, and my father was a distant figure, so the Masonsons' suffocating embrace felt like the shelter I had always craved. We lived in a world of manicured lawns and understated wealth, where social standing was the currency and appearances were everything. Our weekends were a blur of charity galas, sailing club luncheons, and Sunday roasts at Richard and Eleanor's sprawling home. At these gatherings, I was the perfect daughter-in-law. I remembered everyone's name, I laughed at Richard's dry jokes, and I helped Eleanor in the kitchen, listening to her endless, detailed stories about Mark's flawless childhood. Mark was their son, and we all simply orbited him. He was handsome, charming, and coasted through life on the smooth track his parents had laid for him. I loved him, or at least, I loved the version of him I thought existed. I loved the idea of our life together, the stability, the belonging. I mistook their approval for love and their social acceptance for a family. One Christmas, Eleanor had given me a delicate sapphire necklace that had belonged to her own grandmother. "This is for my daughter," she'd whispered, her eyes shining under the twinkle of the Christmas tree lights. "It belongs in the family where you belong." I had touched the cool stones at my throat and felt a wave of such profound gratitude that it brought tears to my eyes. I was one of them. I was safe. I wore that necklace for years, a talisman against a loneliness I couldn't quite shake, a beautiful, sparkling lie I hung around my own neck. The end came not with a bang, but with the quiet, final click of a closing door. It was a Tuesday in October, the air outside crisp with the coming autumn. Mark came home late. Well, after the dinner I'd kept warm for him had gone cold. He moved through our home not like its master, but like a visitor, his movements stiff and unfamiliar. He didn't meet my eyes as he set his briefcase down, avoiding the kiss I leaned in to give him. A knot of ice formed in my stomach. I knew, in the way you know a storm is coming long before the first drop of rain, that my life was about to be torn apart. "We need to talk," he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. He led me to the living room, the one we had spent months decorating together, and gestured for me to sit on the plush cream sofa we'd chosen. He remained standing, looming over me like a judge about to deliver a sentence. "Nick, there's no easy way to say this." He finally looked at me, but his eyes were empty, reflecting nothing. "I've met someone." The words hung in the air, small and sharp and deadly. My mind refused to process them. It felt like he was speaking a foreign language, one I couldn't possibly comprehend. "What?" I whispered, my voice a thread. "What are you talking about, Mark?" He sighed, a sound of pure impatience, as if my confusion was a tedious inconvenience. "Her name is Tiffany. She's 24. I'm in love with her." 24. The number was an insult, a casual dismissal of our shared history, of the lines that were just beginning to form around my eyes, lines from laughing at his jokes and worrying when he was late. "You're in love with her," I repeated, the words tasting like ash. "Just like that? What about us? What about the last 10 years? He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, a gesture of pure frustration. "It hasn't been working for a while, Nick. You have to know that." It was the first volley in a war of gaslighting I would come to know intimately. He was rewriting our history in real time, turning our shared memories into a narrative of my failure. "I'm leaving," he said, the words a final, brutal blow. "My bag's packed. I'm staying with her." I just stared at him, my heart a frantic bird beating against the cage of my ribs. The man I had built my life around was a stranger, and he was walking out the door without a single backward glance. He didn't offer comfort. He didn't apologize. He just left. I heard the front door close, the sound echoing in the sudden, cavernous silence of the house. I sat on that cream sofa for hours, the cold of the empty house seeping into my bones, until the first gray light of dawn broke through the windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, each one a tiny particle of my shattered life. My first instinct, born of a decade of conditioning, was to call Eleanor. I clutched the phone, my hands shaking, my mind a chaotic swirl of pain and disbelief. I needed my other mother, the woman who had called me her daughter. I needed her to tell me this was all a horrible mistake, that she and Richard would talk to Mark, that they would fix this. The phone rang twice before she answered, her voice as crisp as ever. "Nicole? Is everything all right?" I broke then, the carefully constructed dam of my composure crumbling into a torrent of sobs. "Eleanor," I choked out, "it's Mark. He's left me." There was a beat of silence on the other end of the line. It wasn't a comforting silence. It was a cold, calculating one. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head, the rapid reassessment of loyalties. When she finally spoke, her tone had shifted. The warmth was gone, replaced by a brittle chill that was more terrifying than any anger. "Well, Nicole," she said, her voice measured. "A marriage is a partnership. It takes two people to make it work and two people to make it fail. Perhaps you should ask yourself what you could have done differently." I was stunned into silence. There was no sympathy, no "are you okay?" no outrage on my behalf. There was only blame, subtly and expertly laid at my feet. It was a masterclass in emotional cruelty. "He met someone else, Eleanor," I whispered, desperate for her to understand. "A younger woman." I heard her sigh, the same impatient sound Mark had made. "Men can be foolish, of course," she conceded, as if discussing a minor flaw in a prized racehorse. "But they don't stray without reason. Mark needs our support right now. This must be very difficult for him." Difficult for him. The words were a physical slap. In that single, devastating moment, I understood. I was not her daughter. I had never been. I was a temporary fixture, an accessory to her son's life, and now that the fixture was being replaced, I was being discarded along with it. "I need to speak to Richard," I pleaded, a last, desperate hope. "Richard is in agreement with me," she said, her voice final. "Our priority is our son. I'm sure you understand." The line went dead. I held the phone to my ear for a long time, listening to the dial tone, the sound of a world ending. The family I thought I had, the love I thought I'd earned, had vanished in the space of a single phone call. It was a betrayal so swift and absolute it left me breathless, a wound far deeper than the one Mark had inflicted. He had only left me. They were erasing me. The days that followed were a masterclass in social execution. The Mason sons, with the ruthless efficiency of a corporate takeover, began the process of systematically excising me from the world we had shared. It started with the invitations that stopped arriving, the calls that went unreturned. The first public demonstration of my new status as a pariah came a few weeks later, at the annual Autumn Gala for the Children's Hospital, an event we had co-chaired the previous year. Going alone was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. I put on my best dress, a deep emerald green silk, and held my head high as I walked into the glittering ballroom, a tight, painful smile fixed on my face. I spotted them almost immediately, standing in their usual spot by the grand staircase, holding court. Richard looked distinguished in his tuxedo, and Eleanor was resplendent in a silver gown, laughing at something a local councilman was saying. For a heart-stopping second, our eyes met across the crowded room. I saw a flicker of something in her expression. Not guilt, but cold, hard recognition. Then, with a deliberation that was meant to be seen, she turned her back on me, placing a perfectly manicured hand on Richard's arm and steering him away. A moment later, Mark arrived, and on his arm was Tiffany. She was everything I wasn't. Young, blonde, with a laugh that tinkled like ice in a glass, and a dress that was unapologetically short. Eleanor embraced her, a full, warm, theatrical hug, the kind she used to give me. She kissed Tiffany's cheek and adjusted the strap of her dress with a proprietary air. The message was clear, and it was delivered to the entire room. This is the new daughter. The old one is forgotten. I stood there, rooted to the spot, as the whispers started around me. I could feel the pitying glances, the curious stares. I felt like a ghost haunting my own life, invisible to those who mattered, and a spectacle for everyone else. I fled, my heels clicking a frantic rhythm on the polished marble floors, the sound of their laughter chasing me out into the cold night air. The divorce proceedings were not a negotiation. They were a siege. Richard, with his intimate knowledge of our finances, became Mark's chief strategist. He had helped us set up our accounts, advised us on investments, and now he was using that knowledge as a weapon against me. My lawyer, a kind but beleaguered man named Mr. Peterson, would sit across from me in his stuffy office, his desk piled high with documents, and sigh. "They're moving assets, Nicole," he explained, pushing his glasses up his nose. "Richard has set up a series of trusts in Mark's name. They're making it look like his income is a fraction of what it is. It's legal, but it's predatory." I would listen, numb, as he detailed the ways they were systematically dismantling my future. They were fighting me on everything, from the value of our home to my claim on Mark's future earnings. It wasn't about the money for them. It was about power. It was about ensuring I left with as little as possible, a punishment for the inconvenience of my existence. The final humiliation came when I had to retrieve my personal belongings from the house. I had arranged a time when I thought Mark would be at work, but when I arrived, Eleanor's luxury sedan was parked in the driveway. She opened the door before I could even ring the bell, her face a mask of polite condescension. "I thought I should be here," she said, "to make sure there's no confusion about what belongs to whom." She followed me from room to room, her arms crossed, her eyes scrutinizing every item I placed in a box. "That lamp," she'd say with a little frown. "I bought that for Mark's study. I think it should stay. These books? They were a gift to Mark." When I went to my jewelry box, my hands trembled. I reached for the sapphire necklace, her grandmother's necklace, the one she had given me with tears in her eyes. "I'll be taking that, of course," she said, her voice sharp. "It's a family heirloom." My voice was barely a whisper. "You gave it to me. You said I was family." She let out a small, cruel laugh. "Circumstances change, Nicole. It needs to stay in the family." She held out her hand, and like a fool, I dropped the necklace into her palm. Her fingers closed around it, a final symbolic act of repossession. I was no longer family. I was a stranger, a trespasser, a thief in her eyes for wanting to keep the things that had been given to me. I walked out of that house with a few boxes of clothes and books, leaving behind a decade of my life. As I drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror and saw her standing in the doorway, a triumphant silhouette against the light. The divorce was finalized on a gray Tuesday, the kind of day that saps all the color from the world. I walked out of the courthouse with a check that represented a fraction of what I was entitled to, a pittance meant to silence me. My lawyer patted my shoulder awkwardly. It's not fair, Nicole, but it's over. You're free. Free. The word felt like a mockery. I was free, but I was also adrift in a sea of failure and humiliation. I moved into a small, third-floor walk-up apartment in a part of the city I barely recognized. The paint was peeling, the radiator hissed and clanked, and the window looked out onto a brick wall. It was the physical manifestation of my new life, small, bleak, and facing a dead end. The silence in that apartment was a living thing. It was filled with the echoes of Eleanor's cold voice, of Mark's indifferent goodbye, of the whispers at the gala. I would spend hours just sitting on the lumpy sofa, staring at the wall, my mind replaying every betrayal, every small cruelty on a torturous loop. My friend Sarah, my one remaining link to my old life, tried to pull me out of the abyss. She would show up with takeout and bad movies, her presence a small, warm light in the suffocating darkness. "You can't let them win, Nicole," she'd say, her voice fierce with a loyalty I no longer believed I deserved. "They want you to disappear. You have to show them you won't." But I didn't know how. I felt hollowed out, my confidence shattered into a million pieces. Who was I without the Masterson name? Who was I without the role of wife and daughter-in-law? I had poured so much of myself into that identity that there was nothing left for just Nicole. One night, I found a box of old photographs while unpacking. There I was, beaming at my wedding, standing between Richard and Eleanor. There was another of me and Mark on a sailboat, the sun in our eyes. It all looked so real, so happy. I traced the outline of my own smiling face, a woman I no longer recognized. The grief hit me then, a physical wave that knocked the air from my lungs. It wasn't just grief for my marriage, but for the family I thought I had, for the woman I used to be. I slid to the floor, surrounded by the ghosts of my past, and I wept until there were no tears left, a raw, ragged sound of a soul hitting absolute rock bottom. I had nothing. I was nothing. And in the dark, cold silence of that tiny apartment, I truly believed that the Mason sons had won. It was about a month into my new bleak existence when the letter arrived. It was addressed in an elegant, old-fashioned script to Miss Nicole Weatherby, my maiden name, a name I hadn't used in over a decade. It felt like a message from another life. The envelope was thick, creamy cardstock, bearing the letterhead of a law firm in a town I'd never heard of, Gull's Landing. With trembling fingers, I tore it open. The letter was formal and brief. It informed me of the passing of my great-aunt Alara Weatherby. I had to rack my brain to place the name. She was my grandfather's sister, a woman I had met only a handful of times as a small child. I had vague memories of a formidable old woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and hands stained with paint. The letter went on to say that great-aunt Alara, having no children of her own, had left her sole significant asset to me in her will. The asset was a small commercial property known as the Sea Sprite Inn, an inn. The word seemed absurd, fantastical. I imagined a tiny, quaint bed and breakfast, perhaps something I could sell quickly for a little cash to keep myself afloat. A flicker of something, not quite hope, but curiosity, stirred within me for the first time in months. The lawyer, a Mr. Abernathy, had included his phone number. I called him, and his voice was kind and raspy, like old parchment. He explained that the inn had been closed for the better part of a decade, ever since Alara's health had declined. He warned me it was likely in a state of disrepair. "She was a very particular woman, your great-aunt," he said with a dry chuckle. "Stubborn as the granite cliffs the inn is built on. She always said she'd leave it to someone with grit. I suppose she saw something in you, my dear." Grit. The word felt alien. I felt I had none left. But the idea of Gull's Landing, of a place far away from the ghosts of my past, took root in my mind. The following weekend, I drained my meager savings account to rent a car and drove the 3 hours up the coast. The city slowly gave way to rolling hills and then, finally, the vast, shimmering expanse of the ocean. Gull's Landing was a town clinging to the edge of the continent, its clapboard houses painted in cheerful colors, its harbor filled with the gentle bobbing of fishing boats. It felt like a place outside of time. Following Mr. Abernathy's directions, I drove up a winding road that led to the cliffs overlooking the sea, and then I saw it. The Sea Sprite Inn was not the small, quaint cottage I had imagined. It was a magnificent, three-story Victorian Grande Dame, with a sprawling veranda, a turreted corner, and rows of windows that stared out at the ocean like weary eyes. And it was in a terrible state of decay. The paint was peeling in long, curling strips, shutters hung at drunken angles, and the garden was a wild, overgrown tangle of weeds and thorns. It looked haunted, abandoned, forgotten by the world. My heart sank. This wasn't a lifeline. It was an albatross. But as I stood there, with the wind whipping my hair and the scent of salt and decay in the air, I felt something else too. A strange sense of homecoming. The inn, in its dilapidated grandeur, seemed to mirror my own soul. Broken but still standing. I found the key the lawyer had told me about under a loose stone by the back door. The lock was stiff, but with a groan of protest, it turned. The door swung open into a grand foyer. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light, piercing the grimy windows. The air was thick with the smell of dust, old wood, and the faint, lingering scent of lavender. A grand staircase swept upwards into the gloom. Furniture was draped in white sheets, like a congregation of ghosts. It was a wreck. A beautiful, glorious, heartbreaking wreck. In what must have been the old office, I found a heavy wooden chest. Inside, nestled amongst yellowed maps and tide charts, were a series of leather-bound journals. The first page of the first journal was dated 60 years prior. In a bold, decisive hand, it read, "Today, I bought the old sea captain's house. They say a woman can't run an inn on her own. I say, watch me." It was signed, Alara Weatherby. I sank onto a dusty armchair, pulled the sheet off, and began to read. For the next 2 days, I did little else but devour Alara's journals. The world outside the inn, my past, my pain, it all faded away as I was drawn into the story of this woman I barely knew. Alara's voice, captured in ink on the brittle pages, was sharp, witty, and fiercely independent. She wrote of her struggles to secure a loan in an era when banks scoffed at female entrepreneurs. She detailed her battles with dismissive suppliers and condescending townsfolk who were certain she would fail. She wrote about the satisfaction of proving them all wrong, of turning the dilapidated house into a thriving inn that became a beloved local landmark. She wrote of the guests who became friends, of the storms that battered the coast, and of her deep, abiding love for the wild, untamed beauty of the place. She had never married, choosing a life of self-reliance and adventure over convention. "My freedom is a more constant companion than any man could be," she wrote in one entry. In another, "They call me eccentric. I call it living on my own terms. There is a profound power in not needing anyone's approval." Reading her words felt like receiving a direct transmission of strength across the decades. Her struggles mirrored my own, yet she had faced them with a courage I couldn't imagine possessing. She hadn't just survived. She had built something beautiful and lasting in the face of doubt and disapproval. The Mason sons had tried to erase me, to make me believe I was worthless without them. Alara's story was a powerful counter-narrative. It was a testament to a woman's ability to create her own value, to build her own world. As I closed the final journal, the sun was setting, casting long golden rays through the dirty windows of the inn, illuminating the dust in a way that made it look like magic. A decision had taken root in my heart, as solid and certain as the granite cliffs outside. I wasn't going to sell this place. I was going to restore it. I was going to bring it back to life. It was a crazy, impossible idea. I had no money, no experience, and no plan. But for the first time since Mark had walked out the door, I felt a flicker of purpose. The sea sprite inn wasn't an albatross. It was a legacy. It was a challenge. And it was, I realized with a sudden, startling clarity, my only way forward. I would honor the woman who wrote Watch Me by doing just that. The path from that decision to reality was a brutal, uphill climb. The first obstacle was, as always, money. The small settlement from my divorce was a pittance, barely enough to cover the property taxes, let alone a full-scale renovation. My only option was a business loan, a prospect that filled me with dread. I spent weeks in the dusty office of the inn, surrounded by Alara's old ledgers, creating a business plan. I researched everything, from construction costs to hotel management software to the thread count of luxury linens. I didn't just want to restore the old inn. I wanted to transform it. My vision was a high-end boutique hotel, a place of understated luxury and impeccable service. I would call it the Compass Rose, a symbol of guidance and finding one's way. I walked into the local Gulls Landing bank, my meticulously prepared binder clutched in my hands, and sat across from a man named Mr. Sterling, a banker who looked like he'd been carved from the same granite as the cliffs. He listened to my pitch with a skeptical arch to his eyebrows, his face giving nothing away. He looked at my balance sheet, at my lack of experience. "It's a big risk, Miss Weatherby," he said, his tone dubious. "This town has seen a lot of dreamers wash up on its shores." I looked him straight in the eye, channeling a sliver of Alara's defiance. "I'm not a dreamer, Mr. Sterling. I'm a builder, and I will not fail." I don't know what he saw in my face that day. Desperation, determination, or maybe just a ghost of the stubborn woman who had banked here before me. But after a week of agonizing silence, he called and told me the loan was approved. I cried with relief. The real work began then. The loan was substantial, but not infinite. I couldn't afford a large construction crew, so I became a laborer myself. I learned to spackle and sand, to tear down plaster and put up drywall. My days were a blur of physical exertion. I would wake before dawn, my body aching in places I didn't know could ache, and work until long after the sun had set, my hair caked with dust and my hands raw and blistered. There were moments of overwhelming despair, like the day a winter storm caused a section of the old roof to collapse, sending a cascade of icy water into the newly plastered foyer. I sat on the floor, soaked and freezing, and sobbed in frustration, convinced I had made a terrible mistake. But then I would find a small treasure, an old photograph tucked behind a mantelpiece, a beautifully carved piece of driftwood Alara had used as a doorstop, and I would feel her presence, her stubborn spirit urging me on. I was not entirely alone in my monumental task. My friend Sarah, ever loyal, would drive up on weekends, trading her stylish city clothes for paint-splattered jeans. She was useless with a hammer, but she was a genius at moral support. She would bring wine and pizza, and we would sit on the dusty veranda, wrapped in blankets, and she would listen to my litany of woes and triumphs, reminding me of how far I'd come. "Do you realize you haven't mentioned Mark's name in 3 hours?" she said one evening, a proud smile on her face. I hadn't even noticed. My most important ally, however, was a man I met by chance at the local hardware store. Jedediah Stone, or Jed as everyone called him, was a semi-retired contractor, a man whose face was a roadmap of a life spent in the sun and wind. He was gruff, taciturn, and initially deeply unimpressed by the city girl playing renovator. He saw me struggling to load a stack of lumber into my car and, with a heavy sigh, came over to help. "You don't know what you're doing, do you?" he grumbled, effortlessly hoisting the wood. "Not really," I admitted, "but I'm learning." He saw the blisters on my hands, the exhaustion in my eyes, and the stubborn set of my jaw. He started stopping by the inn, at first just to offer gruff, unsolicited advice. "You're using the wrong grade of sandpaper. That wall's load-bearing, you fool." Gradually, his visits became more frequent. He'd show me how to properly frame a wall, how to cut tile without shattering it. He never accepted a penny for his time, claiming he was just bored. But I knew he had seen a kindred spirit in my crazy project. He'd known Alara, had respected her. "She was a tough old bird," he said one afternoon, leaning against a newly installed window frame. "Had a spine of steel. You've got a bit of her in you, I reckon." Coming from Jed, it was the highest compliment I could imagine. He became my mentor, my friend, the father figure Richard had only ever pretended to be. With his guidance, the inn slowly began to transform. The peeling paint was stripped away and replaced with a beautiful, stormy gray. The broken windows were replaced, the floors were sanded and polished to a warm glow, and the wild garden was tamed into a landscape of coastal grasses and rugged, beautiful flowers. I poured every ounce of my being into the details, choosing antique furniture, sourcing linens from Ireland, and designing a menu for the small, intimate restaurant with a brilliant young chef I'd poached from the city. 5 years passed in a whirlwind of sawdust, paint fumes, and small, incremental victories. The Compass Rose finally opened its doors, not with a grand party, but with a quiet, unannounced flipping of the vacancy sign. The first guests were a couple who had stumbled upon it by accident. They left a glowing review online. Then came a travel blogger, then a feature in a regional magazine. The reputation of the Compass Rose grew organically, built on word of mouth. It became known as a hidden gem, a place of quiet luxury, privacy, and impeccable service. It was exclusive, expensive, and always booked months in advance. I was no longer Nicole Masterson, the discarded wife. I was Nicole Weatherby, the proprietor of the Compass Rose, a woman who had built her own kingdom from the ruins. I was calm, I was confident, and for the first time in my life, I was truly, completely my own. The call came on a bright, sunny morning in late spring. I was in my office, a beautiful room in the turret overlooking the sea, going over the quarterly numbers with my manager, Chloe. Chloe was sharp, efficient, and fiercely protective of both me and the hotel. She was the first person I had hired, and she was more of a partner than an employee. "We have a big one," she said, tapping her pen on a file. "A full buyout for the last weekend of June. 50th wedding anniversary party. They want the whole place, all 12 rooms, the restaurant, the gardens. They're paying the premium, no questions asked." I smiled. "That's wonderful. Who's the client?" Chloe glanced down at the file. The booking was made by a high-end event planner in the city. The name on the contract is Masterson. Richard and Eleanor Masterson. The name hit me with the force of a physical blow. I felt the air leave my lungs, and for a terrifying second, the floor seemed to tilt beneath me. The turret room, my sanctuary, suddenly felt like a cage. All the calm, all the confidence I had so painstakingly built over 5 years, threatened to evaporate. Chloe saw the color drain from my face. "Nicole? Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." "You could say that," I managed to whisper, my voice hoarse. My mind was racing. The Mason sons. Here, in my hotel. The irony was so thick, so potent, it was almost suffocating. Of course, the booking had been made through a planner. Eleanor would never have called herself. She outsourced everything. They would have no idea. The most exclusive, sought-after venue on the coast. The perfect place to stage a grand celebration to convince their social circle, and perhaps themselves, that their lives were still perfect. Their failing son's marriage to the young Tiffany was a known source of stress for them, a constant topic of gossip. This party was a power move, a declaration of stability. And they had, in their blind arrogance, chosen my sanctuary as their stage. A cold, quiet calm settled over me, displacing the initial shock. It was the same feeling I'd had when I decided to restore the inn, a sense of profound, terrifying clarity. This was not a disaster. It was a reckoning. It was the closing of a circle I hadn't even realized was still open. "Nicole?" Chloe prompted, her brow furrowed with concern. "Should I cancel it? We can say we're overbooked. I can handle it." I looked out the window at the steady rhythmic crash of the waves against the cliffs below. The sea was indifferent to my turmoil, a comforting, constant presence. I took a deep breath, drawing in the salty air and the strength of this place I had built. I turned back to Chloe, a small, genuine smile touching my lips for the first time. "No," I said, my voice steady and clear. "Don't cancel a thing. In fact, upgrade them. Give them the presidential suite, complimentary." Chloe looked at me, utterly baffled. And Chloe, I continued, my mind already moving, planning. "That weekend, I want you to clear my schedule. I'll be handling the check-in for the Masterson party personally." The day of their arrival was a masterpiece of coastal perfection. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of salt and roses from the garden. The hotel was immaculate, every surface gleaming, every flower arrangement a work of art. My staff, loyal and discreet, knew only that this was a particularly important event. I had told Chloe the bare minimum, that the clients were old family acquaintances. She had looked at me with her intelligent eyes and simply nodded, understanding that there was a story there I wasn't ready to tell. I dressed carefully, not in the formal suit I sometimes wore, but in the simple, elegant uniform of my front desk staff, a crisp white shirt and tailored black trousers. I wanted to be underestimated. I wanted the full impact of the reveal to land. I stood behind the polished mahogany desk in the foyer, my heart a steady, calm drum against my ribs. I was not the trembling, heartbroken woman I had been 5 years ago. I was the master of this domain. At precisely 3 o'clock, a gleaming black Mercedes sedan crunched to a halt on the gravel driveway. The driver opened the rear door, and out stepped Richard Masterson. He looked older, his face etched with fine lines of stress I didn't recognize. He was followed by Eleanor. She was, as always, impeccably dressed in a pale linen suit, but there was a tightness around her mouth, a brittle quality to her movements that betrayed an inner tension. They were arguing in low, sharp whispers as they walked towards the entrance, their faces a mask of strained politeness for the benefit of any onlookers. "I told you we should have checked the location more thoroughly," Richard hissed. "Eleanor, it's the best on the coast." "What is there to check?" she snapped back. "It's for a party, not a corporate merger." They pushed through the heavy oak doors and stepped into the cool, quiet foyer. They stopped for a moment, looking around at the soaring ceilings, the beautiful art on the walls, the view of the endless ocean through the grand windows. I saw a flicker of genuine appreciation on Richard's face, quickly suppressed. They approached the desk, their eyes sweeping over me without really seeing me, just another member of the service staff. "We're here for the Masterson party," Richard announced, his voice carrying the easy authority of a man used to being in charge. I let the silence hang for a beat, savoring the moment. Then I lifted my head and met his gaze directly. I gave them the calm, professional smile I gave all my guests. "Of course," I said, my voice even and clear. "Welcome to the Compass, Rose. We've been expecting you." The transformation on their faces was a slow-motion symphony of shock. Richard's jaw went slack, his eyes widening in stunned disbelief. He took a half-step back, as if the ground had suddenly become unstable. But it was Eleanor's reaction that I will remember for the rest of my life. The color drained from her face, leaving her skin a pasty, sickly white. Her carefully applied lipstick stood out in a stark, garish slash. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, darted around the magnificent foyer, then back to me, as if trying to reconcile two impossible realities. "Nicole?" Richard finally stammered, his voice a hoarse croak. What are you doing here?" Eleanor found her voice then, and it was laced with a familiar, reflexive disdain, the only weapon she had left. "You work here?" she sneered, the question an accusation, an attempt to put me back in the box she had designed for me. The staff at the far end of the foyer, pretending to be busy, were frozen, their ears straining. This was the moment. I leaned forward slightly, placing my hands flat on the polished mahogany, grounding myself in the reality of what I had built. I looked from Eleanor's sneer to Richard's stunned face, and I allowed myself a small, genuine smile. "Work here," I repeated, my voice soft but carrying in the quiet room. "Oh no, Eleanor. I don't work here." I paused, letting the words sink in, watching the confusion cloud their faces. "I own here." I picked up a set of heavy brass keys from the counter and held them out. "We've upgraded you to the presidential suite. It has the best view. I'm so glad you chose my hotel for your very special celebration." The silence that followed was absolute. It was so profound I could hear the frantic beating of Eleanor's heart, or perhaps it was my own. Richard just stared at the keys in my hand as if they were venomous snakes. Eleanor looked as though she had been struck by lightning. Her perfect social mask had shattered, revealing the raw, ugly shock beneath. She looked from me to the opulent surroundings, the truth of the situation crashing down on her with the force of a tidal wave. They had planned their ultimate show of status and stability in the one place on Earth that was a living monument to their failure, to their cruelty. They were not the grand hosts. They were merely guests. And I, the woman they had discarded and tried to destroy, was their host. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had been completely, irrevocably inverted. And the look on their faces, a mixture of horror, humiliation, and unwilling respect, was more satisfying than any revenge I could have ever dreamed of. Later that evening, as the party got underway, the atmosphere in the hotel was thick with unspoken tension. The guests, a who's who of their social circle, arrived in a parade of luxury cars, oblivious at first to the drama unfolding. They complimented Eleanor on her exquisite taste in venues. "Eleanor, darling, this place is divine. How did you ever find it?" I heard one woman gush. Eleanor, her smile a brittle rictus, simply murmured something non-committal and accepted the praise, the lie catching in her throat. Mark and Tiffany arrived late. Mark looked exhausted, the skin around his eyes thin and gray. Tiffany, clinging to his arm, looked profoundly bored, her eyes constantly scanning the room as if searching for an escape or a better offer. Their entrance, which should have been a display of youthful glamour, felt tired and joyless. Mark's eyes found me across the room. I was standing near the bar, speaking quietly with the head chef. He stopped dead in his tracks, his glass halfway to his lips. The look on his face was one of pure, unadulterated shock. He saw me, not as the broken woman he had left, but as this poised, confident stranger in command of this beautiful, thriving world. The news began to spread, a virus in the bloodstream of the party. A few of the guests had known me from my previous life, and they put the pieces together with hushed, excited whispers. The tone of the evening shifted. The Mason sons were no longer the celebrated hosts. They were the main attraction in a drama of their own making. The guests' glances were no longer admiring. They were speculative, laced with a delicious, gossipy pity. It was Eleanor who finally cracked. She found me in a quiet corridor leading to the kitchens, her face a mask of fury. "How could you?" she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "This was a deliberate, calculated act of cruelty. You did this just to humiliate us on our anniversary." I looked at her, at this woman who had shown me no mercy, who had systematically tried to dismantle my life and my spirit, and I felt nothing. No fear, no anger, not even pity. Just a vast, calm distance. "Humiliate you?" I said, my voice quiet but firm. "Eleanor, you, Richard, and Mark wrote the book on humiliation. I was your star pupil. You taught me everything I know about it." Her mouth opened to retort, but I continued, my words a steady, unhurried stream. "You think I built all of this for you? You think my life for the past 5 years has been about some petty revenge plot? Your narcissism is breathtaking." I gestured to the hotel around us, to the sound of the ocean, to the life humming within its walls. "I didn't build this to spite you. I built it for me. I built it on the foundations of the life that you helped burn to the ground. The fact that you are standing in it tonight, having paid a small fortune to rent my success for a few hours, isn't my revenge. It is simply the universe's exquisite sense of irony." I looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw a small, frightened woman, terrified of losing face. "Now, if you'll excuse me," I said, my tone crisp and professional, "I have other guests to attend to and a hotel to run. I do hope you enjoy the rest of the party. After all, you're paying for it." I turned and walked away, not waiting for a response, leaving her standing alone in the hallway, speechless and utterly defeated. The rest of the evening played out like a slow, inevitable collapse. The carefully constructed facade of the Masterson family crumbled under the weight of the guests' knowing glances and whispered conversations. Richard tried a different approach. He found me near the terrace, where I was watching the moonlight sparkle on the waves. He looked older than I'd ever seen him, the confident bluster completely gone, replaced by a weary resignation. "Nicole," he began, his voice low and gravelly. We had no idea. This place, what you've done here, it's truly impressive." I inclined my head slightly, a gesture of polite acknowledgement, nothing more. "Thank you, Richard. We made a mistake," he said, the words sounding like they were being pulled from him under duress. "The way we handled things, it was wrong." It was the closest I would ever get to an apology from him, and we both knew it. It was a concession born not of remorse, but of a grudging respect for my newfound status. He was a man who understood power and success, and I was now, in his eyes, successful. "Yes," I said simply, offering no absolution. "You did make a mistake." I let the statement hang there, a plain and simple fact, offering him no comfort, no emotional release. He nodded, looking defeated, and retreated back into the dying party. My final conversation of the night was with Mark. He cornered me on a secluded balcony, the sounds of the party a muted thrum behind us. He looked at me with a strange, searching expression, a mix of regret and longing. "Nick," he said, using the old, familiar nickname. "I am so sorry. I messed everything up." He gestured vaguely back towards the ballroom. "Tiffany, it's not working. It hasn't been for a long time. We do nothing but fight." He looked at me then, his eyes pleading. "I see you, what you've become, and you're incredible." I was an idiot. It was a classic, desperate gambit, the repentant ex seeing the one that got away thriving. For a moment, a flicker of the old Nicole wanted to feel a surge of triumph, but it was quickly replaced by a profound sense of detachment. I looked at him, at the handsome face now etched with weakness and unhappiness, and I felt a quiet sadness for him. "I'm not the woman you left, Mark," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "I'm grateful for the life I have, and in a strange way, I'm grateful for what happened. It led me here." He took a step closer. "We could try again, Nick. We could." I held up a hand, stopping him. "No," I said, the word a solid, unbreachable wall. "That woman is gone. You're still the man who walked out that door, and I'm the woman who locked it behind her. I truly wish you well, Mark. I hope you find what you're looking for. But it isn't me. Not anymore." The party ended not long after. The Mason sons were the last to leave, a small, defeated trio. Richard gave me a curt, embarrassed nod. Mark wouldn't meet my eyes. Eleanor, her face a pale, strained mask, walked past me without a word, her defeat so total it was almost silent. The final, perfect touch was the bill. I had Chloe prepare the invoice myself. It was meticulously itemized, printed on our heavy cream-colored letterstock, and presented in a crisp, elegant folder. It was a simple, professional transaction, but in the context of the night, it was the final, undeniable statement of my independence. They had paid in full for the privilege of witnessing their own irrelevance. After the last car had pulled away and the staff had begun their quiet, efficient cleanup, I walked through my silent hotel. The air was still, smelling of champagne and extinguished candles. Jed, my old contractor friend, was waiting for me in the restaurant, a bottle of expensive whiskey and 2 glasses on the table. He'd been watching the whole spectacle unfold from a discreet corner of the bar, a wry, knowing smile on his face. He poured 2 generous measures. "To the tough old bird," he said, raising his glass. "And to the one who learned how to fly." We clinked glasses, the sound echoing in the empty room. "Alara would be damn proud of you, kid," he said, his voice uncharacteristically soft. "You didn't just rebuild her, Anne. You rebuilt yourself." And in that quiet moment, with my steadfast friend by my side and the sound of the ocean I loved just outside the window, I knew he was right. I had found my way. A year later, the Compass Rose was featured in a lavish 10-page spread in a prestigious design magazine. The article praised its soulful luxury and its founder's visionary restoration. I sat for an interview, and the journalist asked me about my philosophy. I told her that I believe our most beautiful creations often grow from the most broken ground. I didn't mention the Mason sons by name, of course. I didn't need to. The story was in the walls of the hotel, in the strength I had found there. My success was the only commentary necessary. That Christmas, a thick, expensive-looking card arrived. It was from Richard and Eleanor. The message inside was stilted and awkward, full of empty platitudes about forgiveness and moving forward. Tucked inside was a check for a significant amount of money. The memo line read, "Atonement." It was a clumsy, transparent attempt to buy their way back into my life, a gesture made only because my success had now made me someone they wanted to be associated with again. I looked at the check, at the sterile, transactional nature of their apology. 5 years ago, that money would have been a lifeline. Now, it was an insult. It was an attempt to put a price tag on the pain they had caused and the strength I had gained. I walked out onto my balcony, the cold winter wind sharp against my face. I looked at the check, then out at the vast, powerful ocean and the beautiful, resilient life I had built for myself. I didn't need their money. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their atonement. I slowly and deliberately tore the check into 4 pieces and let the wind carry them away, tiny white specks disappearing into the churning gray waves. It was the final quiet act of setting myself free. So that's my story. That's how the worst, most painful chapter of my life became the foundation for everything I now hold dear. I learned that family isn't about blood or a name. It's about who shows up for you when the storm hits. I learned that our greatest strength is often forged in the fires of our deepest pain. And I learned that true vindication isn't about revenge. It's about building a life so full and beautiful that you no longer have room for the ghosts of the past. The betrayal that was meant to destroy me ultimately saved me. It forced me to dig deep and find a resilience I never knew I possessed, to become a woman my great Aunt Alara would have been proud of. My happiness is not a reaction to their cruelty. It's a testament to my own strength. It's a structure I built myself, board by board, nail by nail, right here on the edge of the world. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever been underestimated or cast aside by people who were supposed to support you? Share your story in the comments below, because our stories are powerful and they deserve to be heard. Don't forget to like this video if my journey resonated with you, and subscribe to the channel for more stories of resilience and transformation. And if you know someone who needs to hear this message, please share it with them. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. I want you to remember that your worth is not determined by who walks out of your life, but by the beautiful, strong, incredible world you build for yourself after they're gone.